Well, I don't think I've looked forward as much to doing a podcast as this one, Professor Wilson, because as you know, we've been speaking about it for the past, 5 weeks it's taken. And with almost every day that passes and the evidence that comes out of the trial of Julia Wandelt and Karen Sprague for harassment and stalking the McCanns, there's another twist. There's another kind of jaw-dropping piece of evidence, and it's got me angry. But anyway, how are you? First of all, I should ask how you.
I've had quite a busy week, and I'm doing the Tring Book Festival this weekend. So tonight I'll be raising money for our village hall roof, talking about my latest book. And tomorrow I'm talking at the Tring Book Festival. So a busy week for me, but I know you've been following this case assiduously and becoming increasingly angered by it, have you not?
Yes, because just 24 hours ago, we had Julia Wandelt and Karen Sprague found not guilty of stalking the McCanns. Julia claiming that she, of course, was Madeline McCann herself, but she was found guilty of harassment, although Karen Sprague was cleared of both charges. She is, although, part of that conspiracy movement who believes that there's something fishy and there's a cover-up somewhere. Julia Wandelt, to my mind, is a mentally ill woman, and this should have been flagged up, or if it was flagged up, it should have been acted on long before it ever got to 5 weeks of trial, putting the McCanns as well, and their children. The judge said it was necessary for the children to give evidence, putting their children, Madeline's siblings, through quite a distressing ordeal. And it came out, of course, it's harassment, it's not stalking. And again, it's a 6-month maximum sentence the judge could impose. And Julia Wandelt had spent 6 months already on remand. So she's waiting now to be deported to Poland, I presume. But when you look at what stalking could be and the limits of where a stalking offence would come in, I think there's definitely very good evidence that it was stalking too. But what was your take on it?
Well, I was surprised by a number of things in relation to the trial. Like you, I was surprised it took so long. 5 weeks for what seemed to me to be pretty open and shut, to be honest. I was surprised by that. I was particularly surprised by the dropping of um, the finding of not guilty in relation to the stalking charges, because, like you, I felt it was pretty obvious that there was stalking in relation to this case. Stalking for me is a form of behavior, Martin. It's about somebody who inserts themselves into another person's life. And it's not done just once or twice. It's done as a pattern of behavior. And quite clearly, for me, Van Delt had done that in relation to the McCanns. Stalking is sometimes mistaken for simply you follow somebody, but it doesn't need to be. You don't need to be in the presence of the person you're stalking for it to be stalking. It can be done online. It can be done via email. It can be done by a telephone. It can be done by text message. It can be done by letter. And so for me, this has been a consistent pattern of Van Delt's behavior. So I was surprised that the jury found her not guilty in relation to that charge.
Certainly harassment, but on the stalking thing, you're right. It doesn't have to have violence in it, but if it causes distress, then that's certainly a justification for bringing a stalking charge. And bearing in mind, when you hear some of the evidence, as many as 60 texts, 60 messages in one day from Julia Wandelt to Kate McCann, causing her great stress, sending them letters, signing them, Madeline, dear mummy, being outside their house, approaching them, contacting Jerry McCann's hospital, trying to find out what's going on, accusing them of, a cover-up of some kind, saying, do you not want to know what happened to Madeline? I mean, there's just so much harassment, certainly, but I thought stalking could get up to 10 years if they'd been found guilty on this, but 6 months and she's off to Poland. Now, the interesting thing is, for me, David, is that when you come to look at this case, and the McCanns have said that they didn't want necessarily to bring this to trial. They don't believe in those things. They clearly thought from early doors that this woman had a mental illness of some kind. In fact, before she even claimed that she was Madeline McCann, she claimed she was two other missing girls as well. One from Germany, Inga Gericke, and this is before Madeline, she claimed. And then another one, a girl who was actually kidnapped from her home in Salt Lake City in Utah, Acacia Bishop. She claimed that maybe she was them to a Polish charity of missing people. And they tried to tell her, no, you're not. Definitely not. You're 1,000% not them. And then she said, well, maybe I'm Madeline McCann. And they tried to tell her as well, no, you're not Madeline McCann. And so it goes on. And then through, meeting a PR person who claims he was a journalist, but was actually a convicted fraudster. She actually starts a campaign, a publicity campaign of kind. She goes to the States and she's put on television in the States. And all of a sudden, there's 1 million followers on social media saying, yeah, quite right, you're Madeline McCann. Because, of course, it feeds in to that whole conspiracy network that are probably watching this or listening to this thinking, you're part of it as well, aren't you?
Well, I was going to say, you especially, and me through my association with you, now get caught up in the conspiracy theory itself, don't we? But you're quite right. This is a consistent pattern of behavior on Wandelt's part. She appears on Dr. Phil. She actually took part in a podcast with Mariana Spring, or that's still available to listen to, about 18 months ago, in which she apologizes for causing the McCanns distress, and says effectively, she doesn't use these words, but effectively she said she was going to stop. But of course, she clearly doesn't stop.
No.
And that's because there is an underlying personality problem there, which I would say is delusional disorder. There are a variety of delusional disorders, erotomania, somatic, persecutory. But in Wandelt's case, I think what we've got here is grandiose delusional disorder, where she believes that she is somebody of import. And that disorder is about having an unshakable belief in something that is patently not true. That's the disorder. Now, without wishing to get too technical, that's different from schizophrenia because she's not hearing voices or seeing visions. She's functioning in other aspects of her life. But the delusional disorder is just the belief that somehow you're Christ, you're Napoleon, or in this case, I'm Madeline McCann, even though there is absolutely no evidence to demonstrate that you are Madeline McCann. You cannot shake that belief. And that is my biggest worry, Martin, because I just feel that you don't stop this unless there are some real interventions. And a restraining order for me is probably not going to be enough because everybody has tried to say to Julia Wandelt, you are not Madeline McCann, but she continues to claim that, even though there is evidence in 100 different ways to the contrary. So my worry for the McCanns is they might be thinking this is the end of what has been happening, but which I hope to be the case, but I see no evidence that this will stop her from still claiming to be Madeline McCann.
No, because she will be deported back to Poland. And that's out of our jurisdiction. She can do what she wants. The judge may say, you can't talk to the press. Well, that's fine, but she can talk to the press from Poland or, quite frankly, anywhere, from Cali onwards, she can talk to the press. And the British judiciary have no way of pulling her back on that. They're not going to extradite her if we had an arrangement with Poland, are they? So I fully expect you're right, she will carry on with this. And another thing that interested me, Professor, in the things that were coming out, eye-opening, I thought, from this case, was that Julia Wandelt is just one of 12 people who the police know or have been approached by 12 people who claim to be Madeline McCann.
So, that's the grandiosity. So the first thing to say is that Madeline McCann is probably the most famous child abduction, missing persons case in the world. So you don't want to be just any old missing child. You want to be the most famous missing child. And social media allows for those claims to go viral. And and what that does by going viral is it reinforces what it is that the person with delusional disorder is seeking, which is attention, is to be the center of things. Because so often the delusional disorder comes from a feeling of having some kind of childhood trauma where they were isolated. They may have been physically, mentally, or sexually abused. So they want to have some kind of control. They want to have some kind of status. They want to be given attention for who they are, because this is ultimately about their identity.
Now, she was known to the authorities, so this has been going on for a while, a couple of years or so. Why could they not have applied to have her sectioned?
Because there would be a number of, in terms of the British law, and in terms of the British law, so we're talking about the 1983 Mental Health Act, which has been updated on a number of occasions since it was first introduced in 1983. This is somebody who's functioning in other aspects of her life. She is not, she's not hearing voices. She's not seeing visions. She's not prevented from being able to lead a normal life. And so sectioning her would have been very difficult indeed under the provisions of English law. I can't obviously speak for Polish law. And but there does come a point at which the delusion, if it continues for so long, will probably escalate, especially if it goes untreated. And at that point, when it is impossible for them to live their life because they are so delusional, it's at that point there could have been some kind of sectioning process under British law. But it would be very difficult. She's not schizophrenic. Um, she's not even got narcissistic personality disorder. It seems to me she is simply delusional.
Well, it's interesting you say she's not got this and not got that, because again, after the trial is over, out comes now some of the background information, including a psychologist from the West Coast of the States who felt sorry for her, who took her over and lived. She lived in this this woman's house for quite some time. And lo and behold, just recently, in the guest room where she slept, the cleaner, can be a very good cleaner, because this was a while ago, has just found under one of the pillows a whole ream of evidence, pictures alluding to birth certificates of who Julia Wandelt is, which is a young Polish woman, full stop. And this psychologist is suggesting that she's not ill at all. She's a fraudster.
Well, there's an element of. Now, you see, that's where there is this element of how does the delusional person genuinely believe the delusion? So there's an enigma within a puzzle. Is the person who's delusional really, do they really believe what they're saying? Or are they tricking you? Is the delusion inauthentic because it provides some kind of instrumental purpose for them, such as gaining 1 million followers on Instagram, such as gaining money, such as gaining a book deal? So there are elements to that. But it would, even with all the evidence that's presented to Julia Wandelt consistently over a long period of time, several years, she has had this unshakable belief that she is, in fact, Madeline McCann. And, and even though it has given to her followers, attention, travel opportunities, TV opportunities, she's never actually changed from her belief. She's stuck with, I am Madeline McCann. And remember, that was the name of her Instagram page. It wasn't, am I Madeline McCann? It was, I am Madeline McCann. So for me, this has been delusional disorder as opposed to her simply being a fraudster. And this is clearly a very damaged young woman, therefore. And I can only say, I hope she gets the appropriate psychodynamic treatment in Poland, which will tackle this delusional disorder. Because if it's not tackled, it will get worse.
And of course, she was encouraged by Karen Spragg, the 61-year-old woman from Cardiff who was found not guilty of harassment or of stalking. Karen Spragg egged her on, along with the other conspiracy theorists. I just wondered, do you think they'll have seen this as some kind of victory? They've 5 weeks of PR. They've put the McCanns, who they clearly believe have got some more to answer for, through the stress and their children of a court case. Well, they think that, well, we've done well here. You know, we're still alive. And also, David, you talk about Julia Wandelt's Instagram post. If you go on there, onto social media just now, it's still littered with very similar stories, and the conspiracy theorists. They're still a force to be reckoned with.
This is a total victory for we should be harassing the McCanns. I mean, it gives me no pleasure to say that because their life is already a living hell, and I fear that their lives are going to continue to be a living hell. Because if I was of that conspiracy theory that believed that the McCanns had something to answer for, then what happens through this trial is the finding of not guilty, both of harassment and stalking of of Karen Spragg, is almost like permission to continue harassing the McCanns in the belief that they've got something to hide. Now, remember, there's a kind of psychological social identity going on here as well, isn't there? Because that conspiracy theory that believes that the McCanns have some part to play in what happens to Madeline, up to and including it was them that caused her death, her disappearance and death, then all the people are invested in that social conspiracy because people are invested in that conspiracy theory because it gives them a social identity. And the trial is going to do nothing to undermine that social identity. It's probably going to encourage that social identity because they're going, well, look, there you are. A jury of our peers said there was no stalking here in relation to Karen Spragg. There was no harassment here. And I just come back to, what is stalking? Stalking is about somebody imposing themselves in your life in a consistent, repeated way that constitutes a pattern of behavior. And Julia Wandelt has repeatedly done that in relation to the McCanns. And so, frankly, I think we're going to be having this discussion in 6 months, 9 months' time.
It was interesting to see because I've seen them on socials, and yeah, you're right. They've attacked me. They've attacked you as well because we're all part of it, clearly. And it was interesting to actually see one of the conspiracy theorists in the flesh, to see Karen Spragg. There she is, 61-year-old woman, blonde lady with her husband, I presume, coming out of the court, grinning at the end of it, clearly very happy that she's not been convicted of anything. But I don't know, is she a mum? Is she a grandmother? Whatever it is, she got kids, she got family. She seems just like a very nice, ordinary lady. But here she is, tied up in all this. And bearing in mind, again, another thing that came out during the trial was that Wandelt and Spragg, they've been making plans to search the McCann's bins, to follow them to a restaurant and try and get their cutlery to see if they could get DNA from Kate McCann to compare it to Julia to prove, this is the daughter. It's almost like it's the armchair detectives. It is the kind of the true crime, podcasters who've got no experience in any of this, but think they know how to solve it, and they know who's committed it, and they're not going to give up.
So go back to the delusional disorder. It's an unshakable belief. And so even though Julia Wandelt and presumably also Karen Spragg have been shown repeatedly that there is no DNA match between Wandelt and the McCanns, because that DNA testing was done by another, including the police, then they somehow believe oh, it was faked. The DNA tests were all faked to prove that there was no connection between Julia Wandelt and Kate and Jerry McCann. So that's why they're following the McCanns to restaurants in the hope of being able to get their cutlery. That's why they want to go through their bins, because they themselves want to do the DNA testing to prove or disprove what it is that Julia Wandelt says. And conspiracy theories don't just disappear. They don't evaporate, because obviously those conspiracy theories aren't based on evidence. They're based on opinion. They're based on belief. And all that we see in this case is how social media permits a conspiracy theory to take off and then to be reinforced. And because you were the first person to ever put the McCanns on television, well, I think it was an auntie of of Madeline's, wasn't it? It was a sister of Jerry McCann's that you put on Good Morning Britain. You will be seen as having a part to play in the cover-up as they would see it. And that therefore becomes unshakable as well. It doesn't matter that you had nothing to do other than perform a journalistic duty. Then you're seen as being caught up in what it is that they're fighting against. They see themselves, and in a righteous way, they see themselves as fighting for justice, whereas in fact it's simply nonsense.
No, they're the crusaders. They think they are, aren't they? They even talked about Karen Sprague talked about sitting outside the McCann's house before they were going to knock on the door and say hello, mummy, it's me. And the thrill they had of being like private investigators. It's kind of this is giving them something new in life, a reason for being.
Well, and it's, I kind of was trying to think, knowing we were going to do the podcast, Mark, I was trying and think of other famous cases of people with delusional disorder. And the cases that one comes up against are usually people who believe that they are the second coming of Christ, that they are Napoleon. They are famous people. There's a grandiosity in terms of their delusional disorder. And of course, you don't want that to go away, do you? If you believe that you are Christ, then you want to have followers. If you believe that you really are Madeline McCann, and yet nobody's prepared to listen to your story, then you are also going to get followers. And that's really what's behind the delusional disorder, that the idea that you are given a kind of centrality in a public discourse that you feel has been absent in your life from childhood. And one of the things that's I'm always very careful about trying to be not to simply diagnose people from afar. But the great thing about Julia Wandelt is she's given so many interviews. I've seen her so regularly that I'm very comfortable in saying that she has grandiose delusional disorder. And the other part about that grandiosity is it also has a narcissism to it. It is about drawing attention to herself. And, if she has been sexually abused, which she claims, then I understand entirely why she would want to tell her story, be empowered. But she's got that wrong, really, in feeling that she has become empowered by believing, which untruthfully believing wrongly, that she's Madeline McCann.
Do you think we'd be talking about this if it hadn't been for social media? It's kind of just basically whipped up, given people like her, an attention seeker, that platform, and it has plugged into all the others who want to find, a reason for being in life, accusing someone, or they can solve the crime or wherever it might be. If social media hadn't given them that whole kind of express train to drive away with, we wouldn't be talking about this, would we? No one would care about her. No one would know.
Well, you're absolutely right. Listen, she got over 1 million followers on Instagram by simply having a website, a page that said, "I am Madeline McCann." She speaks about this. What I find so fascinating about the case is that Mariana Spring in her podcast, interviews Julia Wandelt 18 months ago, 2 years ago, in which Julia Wandelt is saying, "Oh yes, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done this," and then reveals a little bit about her childhood, how she felt bullied at school, and so forth. You begin to tick off the boxes, or I was ticking off the boxes listening to the podcast, saying, "Oh yeah, this is delusional disorder, grandiose delusional disorder." And so without social media, as you say, she'd never have got 1 million followers. She'd never have been interviewed on American television on Dr. Phil. She'd never have made it to a podcast with Mariana Spring. And she would never have made it to our podcast discussing how on earth she got a 6-month sentence and is still claiming to be Madeline McCann.
And just finally, one other thing that was thrown up by the trial was just how badly little tiny staffing levels there are in Operation Grange looking for Madeline now. I think there's one detective who's kind of part-time. He's got a civilian worker who it sounds like, a policeman working out of a broom cupboard, to be honest.
Well, I have said on this pod before, it's called propaganda, like propaganda, except it's propaganda on behalf of the police. It's propaganda. And whenever they tell me that there's a cold case review team in a particular police force area, I know that's two blokes in an ill-fitting suit sitting in a broom cupboard, Googling things. But I also believe that, it's time also to recognize that public money shouldn't be spent on the Operation Grange. Somebody goes missing in this country every 15 minutes. And I think we have to accept, the McCanns don't need to accept, but I think we have to accept that Madeline is dead. And if there are developments in the case in relation to who might have killed her, and Christian Bruckner still seems to me to be a very good and prime suspect, if there are developments in the case, those would be picked up by the normal way that cold cases are picked up when new evidence is emerging. And I don't think we should be spending any more public monies on Operation Grange, in my view.
And Jerry McCann in the trial as well said that as far as they're concerned, until they know otherwise, Madeline is still alive. And that's why these kind of stories cause distress when people are claiming, I'm Madeline. It's almost like I am Spartacus, isn't it? I am Madeline. I am Madeline. And
the interesting thing about Jerry's argument, Martin, was that was the argument that was weaponized by Julia Wandelt. She said, until there's evidence that disproves me from being Madeline McCann, I'm going to continue to claim I'm Madeline McCann. And that magical thinking, Madeline is still alive despite all the evidence to the contrary that we have, that they continue to cling on to. I understand why they're clinging on to it. But that argument that Jerry McCann ran was exactly a form of the argument that Julia Wandelt ran as well. Show me the evidence that disproves that I'm Madeline McCann. Of course, there is evidence that disproves that she's Madeline McCann, but she doesn't accept how that evidence was gathered. So we've got to be careful there about that. We just have to acknowledge what we know to be the truth and what we can infer is the truth. And what we can infer is the truth in relation to a child of Madeline's age that's abducted by a predatory paedophile is that she would have been dead within 48 hours.
So awful to think of that. There's just, the poor McCanns is all I can say, having to go through all that again. You think all these years on, you just want to try and move on with your life. Still, keeping a window open, thinking hope against hope that, one day, you might get closure of some kind, wouldn't you? And you're dragged through this. Professor, thank you so much. I just wonder, so there's 11 more so-called Madelines to go through. Please, God, we don't have to go through this 11 more times.
Well, my fear is, Martin, not that we have to go through it with 11 other Madelines. My fear is that we have to go through this another 11, another 21, 31, 51 times with Julia Wandelt, because Julia Wandelt will be celebrating. She is convicted of harassment and she's got restraining orders that are going to mean nothing to her while she's in Poland. So she's going to continue claiming that she's Madeline McCann.